Psalms chapter 84 and verse 10. For a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. So one day in the kingdom of heaven is better than 1,000 of your best days on this side, man. Let me repeat that again. One single day in the kingdom of heaven is better than 1,000 of your best days on this side, man. Okay? Where things were better for you. Moments that you can reminisce on and say, yeah, that was a good day. The kingdom of heaven blows it out the park, man. It blows out the water. Just one day. Not to mention, the Heavenly Father, He's going to stretch out the time. He's going to expand the time so you can enjoy your immortality. You can enjoy your life. And the Lord said in Wisdom of Solomon, He created the Israelite man to be an image of his own eternity, man. We're going to be a likeness of his own eternity, man. We're going to be many most highs, man. We're going to be many most highs. Okay? God's on earth under Yahweh Shemiah Shah.
I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High.
And also what's going to make us gods? These laws, statutes, commandments, and us judging by the laws, statutes, commandments, but also these laws being in our inward parts, making us those perfect judges. Not to mention, we experience these different reincarnations in this wicked flesh, so we know how to judge the flesh. We know how to judge this body because we've been in this body many times. Okay? But once again, the kingdom of heaven is going to be patterned after the mind of Yahweh Shemiah Shah, man. A righteous paradigm.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem, Rakakodash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers. And peace and blessings, salutations to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word in truth. And it's a series of Apostle Four Winds in the name of Yahweh Bashem Shah, pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful lake, the believers, the listeners, whom have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashem Shah. All right. Well, I want to get into the day. I found the video that was pretty informative, especially dealing with, certain events, that we see playing out today concerning prophecy. And one thing we have to understand, history gives us a better understanding of the present and, where things are going, so we go into these things as you go into the scriptures. In fact, let's start here. Set a foundation in the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay. So you go here to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. It's in the NLT. It says, history merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new, and what we're seeing, happening now, has happened before. All right, because as we know, as people are reincarnated, kingdoms are reincarnated. Okay. And what we've seen now, the kingdom, all right, of Esau, Edom, is nothing but, a revived Greco-Roman Empire in the earth, so they will be doing, the same things that the Greco-Roman Empire would do. Okay. And this is what we're seeing playing out real time in the earth. All right. And we at a time now, okay, a war. Okay, and we have to understand, one of the rivalries of Esau, Edom, of course, Israel and Edom. All right, we had, rivalries, especially during the time of King David. Okay, And then, the devils also, had a rivalry, with the Persians. Okay. And what we have to understand, Iran and these small hats is a revived rivalry between Amalek and Persia. Okay. And we're going to get into these things. Okay. So it says history merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say here is something new, but actually it is old. Nothing is ever truly new. Okay. So understanding history, gives us a better understanding of the present and the future and what things are headed. Okay. And this is how we know, America spiritually, Babylon spiritually, Egypt. Okay. Rome revived in the earth, because understanding the history of those kingdoms and seeing how this kingdom operates, it ties together in the spirit. Okay. Now, I want to go here because one thing that these devils, love to do, is to spin, the narrative. Well, when you go into this word narrative, all right, because the devil with his news, his propaganda, he's able to spin, okay, narratives in his favor. Okay. Now, when you go into the word narrative, what is narrative? Narrative is a spoken or written account of connected events, a story. Okay. History, description, okay, accounts. Okay. And what the devil does, okay, with these things, he spins it, okay, to where he's always the victim and the hero, and everyone else is the villain. Okay. So the villain might change, but he always plays the victim, all right, and the hero in his narrative that he spins. Okay, now you go to this AI overview, just look up spinning the narrative, refers to the practice of presenting information in a way that subtly or overtly influences how people, all right, perceive a situation. Okay, so this devil, he's able, all right, present information in a particular way, all right, that forms, okay, a narrative that's not true. Okay, and it creates a false reality, for the people that listening and right and believe in what this man is saying. It said often by emphasizing certain aspects while downplaying or omitting others. Okay, and that's what this devil does, with his news, because he'll hype up, when he's being attacked. Okay, but when he's the one that's attacking and starting this, he omits that. He omits the history, okay, of decades of him terrorizing the people, and then they finally react, okay, and they make it seem like people are reacting to his terrorism. Okay, these people are barbarians, they're savages, they're terrorists. Okay, you see, so forth and so on. He did it with the natives. He made it seem like Gad was just these savages, and they were just rolling up on these, these Christian Edomite families. They was just trying to, enjoy, the land. And, okay. He spins these narratives as if he's always the victim and the hero, and everyone else is the savage, the barbarian, okay, the terrorist, all these different buzzwords that they use. Okay. It says it involves framing events or facts to create a specific impression. Even if the underlying truth remains the same, this can be done through various techniques like bias reporting. Okay, that's why when you listen to news of the West, okay, which other news, you got to filter through alternative news as well. Okay, but especially mainstream media in the West is extremely biased, all right, to Edomite supremacy. Okay, extremely biased to Edomite supremacy, man. Okay, exaggeration. Okay, they love to exaggerate. They exaggerate, the damage that they do in war. Okay, they exaggerate, what the other side, has done, to them. Has, you know, you can kill one, civilian. Okay, of an Edomite, nation. Okay, and they exaggerate it as if the world got to stop. They blow it out of proportion. They go into the life story of the victim, and they do this and do that, but he can kill tens of thousands of civilians and is downplayed, okay, or omitted out of most reports. Okay, it says exaggeration or embellishment, while spinning the narrative can be a manipulative tactic. Okay, it can also be used to highlight different perspectives and interpretations of events. So this devil, he knows how to spin the narrative, in his favor. Okay, and what we see the devil doing in any situation, he's always trying to spin the narrative. When it comes to who the true Israelites are, he tries to spin that narrative to fit him. Okay, those small hats, those devils that's in the land. Okay, now he emphasizes, them being in the land. Okay, justifies that they're the people. Okay, but he downplays the prophecy. All right, that goes into the true people returning. Okay, and this is how the devil, spins the narrative. There's many other things that he spins the narrative on, but we're gonna stick with this story. Now she's gonna go into the history, of the Greeks and the Persians, okay, and different historians of the Greeks, that they was, because this is nothing new. Spinning the narrative is nothing new. They've been doing this since antiquity. Okay, so she's gonna go into some history, and we're gonna go into the similarities of today, and line these things up and show, how that same narrative, all right, that these devils, have been running with since antiquity, that same narrative is still in effect today. Okay, so let's play this. We'll get some more precepts. Lord will, you brothers and sisters are edified. So let's go here.
There's a feud between Iran and the West that spanned coups, sanctions, and standoffs.
The world's #1 state sponsor of terror.
Covert operation to overthrow Mossadegh.
The Shah, who had fled to Rome, comes home.
Hundreds of thousands take to the streets.
1979 turned everything upside down.
But it didn't start in 1979, or with Mossadegh, or even with Iran.
The largest empire the world had ever seen.
It goes back over 2,000 years to the Persian Empire. That's where we find one of the oldest stories ever told, the battle of good versus evil.
Erased from history.
Of freedom versus tyranny. Of valiant West versus despotic East.
It's the victors who write the history books.
1,000 nations but the Persian Empire descend upon you.
This origin story helps us understand what has been unfolding for the past century, continuing into today. So if you want to understand why the West hates Persia, first you have to understand why it worships Greece.
The finest soldiers the world has ever known.
Hi everyone, it's Tala. Before we dive deeper, we want to give a special thank you to our supporters on Patreon. Doing this work takes time, resources, and editorial independence, so it wouldn't be possible without our supporters online. If you believe in what we're doing and want to be a part of this with us, you can join our Patreon. It's how we keep this going. Now back to the video.
A people glorious and arrogant, valiant and headstrong.
No other city has shaped the Western world so much as Athens.
In Western culture, ancient Greece is seen as the cradle of philosophy, science, and most importantly, as the birthplace of democracy. Entire university departments are dedicated to this era, called the Classics, a name fitting for how these contributions are seen, as classic, foundational. That's because the West sees ancient Greece and Rome as the birthplaces of Western civilization.
And this also goes into the image of the beast, okay? Because as she went into, the West, sees Greece and Rome as the cradle of civilization. This is where they see civilization starting, democracy. And brothers always go into, the draconian law, okay, that they're going to put forth, to mandate the sea hill. Well, that draconian, all right, law comes from Athens, Greece, okay? So we're seeing, okay, the Greco-Roman Empire at play, okay, and the image of the beast, all right, is Greco-Rome, okay. This society is modeled after Greco-Roman culture, medicine, all right, philosophy, all right, the gods of Greco-Rome, okay. Everything is embedded, all right, in Greco-Rome in this society. So let's go here and keep playing some more. You're gonna see, even this was Obama over there. All right, well, all these presidents, even Elon Musk, he's been infatuated with Rome, wearing a Rome attire, and they say doing a Roman salute, and or going back to the Caesars. Okay, you have Trump. All right, Nero. Okay, in office. This is Rome revived, but the image of the beast is speaking through this society. All right, this is a mirror. Okay, when you look at something in the mirror, you're looking at your image. You're looking at the image. Okay, so for America, all right, and these Western nations stand in the mirror, they will be in the image, okay, of Greco-Rome. Okay, so let's let this play.
Only are you getting a better understanding of Greece and Western culture, but you're also sending a signal of the continuity that exists between what happened here and what happened with our founding fathers.
This first happened over 300 years ago during the Renaissance, when there was a rebirth of interest in ancient Greek art, literature, philosophy, and science after the so-called Dark Ages. Fun fact, this rebirth was possible because ancient Greek texts had been preserved in Arabic. Their translation into Latin made them accessible to Latin Europe, prompting the Renaissance. Then came the Enlightenment, where the thinkers of the time were reading and inspired by the works of ancient Greece and saw themselves as inheriting the legacy of Greek reason, logic, and inquiry. Athenian democracy was a symbolic ancestor for new ideas of liberty and citizenship. Ancient Greece became more than history. It became an origin story, the birthplace of Western civilization.
So real quick, let's give some precepts, all right, because you spoke about the Renaissance period, okay, which we always go into it. And this is when, these devils, were allowed, to have authority in the earth again, because we know, let's go here, get a couple prophecies. Okay, let's go here to Revelation, the 20th chapter. Okay, because these devils, they were shut out. When you go here to Revelation 21, it says, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand." Okay, holding is Yahushua, because Yahushua has been given authority, to take nations out of captivity and put nations in captivity. Okay, it says, "And he laid hold on the dragon, the old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years." Okay, and this is during the time what they call the Dark Ages. Okay, when Jake, was ruling, in Europe, in Russia. Okay, the Iberian Peninsula. We had the time of the Moors. Okay, all this was going on while this devil, okay, the deceiver, this old serpent, letting the spirit that he comes in, and old, sly, a serpent from the garden, which was a man, but he was described as a serpent for being crafty. Okay, and then you have, Satan, Shaitan, the adversary, which the devils come in the spirit of Shaitan. Okay, but that energy of the serpent, the devil, and Satan that's on Esau, Edom, okay, was bound. Okay, he wasn't able to have influence, okay, in the earth for 1,000 years. He was pushed to the side. Okay, pagan Rome fell, and Jake, you had that what you call the Holy Roman Empire. All right, during the time of what you call the Byzantine Empire, and Jake had started becoming emperor, you know, a couple hundred years before, Western Rome fully fell. Okay, but when Western Rome fell, it was it. The devil was pushed to the side. All right, and it says, and cast him into the bottomless pit. Is going into Europe. All right, mainly Eastern Europe, over there by the Caucasus Mountains. Georgia, Russia. Over in the Ukraine area of today. Okay, then shut him up and set a seal upon him that he should not deceive the nation no more till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. And now we're in that little season where the devil's being loose, which is called the Renaissance. And what did he do? He brought back, okay, all that Greco-Roman thought, philosophy, okay, culture, okay, medicine. You see, he brought all that back with him when he was loose a little season, and we're in that little season. Okay, that's why you go here to Malachi. You see, and all that propaganda, that you had back then, all that's been brought back. Even doctrine of discovery. All it goes back, to Rome, scientific racism. Rome had scientific racism. Okay. Now this is Malachi 1:4 says, where Edom says we are impoverished. And that's when he was, cast into, their prison. Okay. When he was, pushed out, okay, of having influence in the earth. Okay, it says, but we will return and build the desolate places, the Renaissance. Thus said the Lord of hosts, they shall build, and they built Greco-Rome back in the earth. Okay, through America, NATO, and the EU. Okay, Greco-Rome has been revived. It said they shall build, but I will throw down. And now we're in the time of throwing down. And this is why you have all these war tensions in the earth, because the Lord's getting ready to throw this devil down. Because in the midst of this Third World War, which the devil is going to destroy a lot of his own infrastructure, Yahweh Shai is going to come in and clean shop, with the angels. Okay? And it says, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord Yahweh Bashim Shai have indignation forever, man. And he's known as the border of wickedness, because wherever the devil is allowed to set up shop, wickedness becomes a standard. Okay? But he presents wickedness as liberty. Okay? And he presents structure and order as evil and tyrannical, man. This is the narrative that he constantly spins. So let's go here. Go back to the video. All right. She gonna get into it. Okay. And then you have the age of enlightenment she was speaking of, and this is really what you call the Illuminati. All right, these different you had this guy Adam Weishaupt, when you go into the age of enlightenment. Okay. So that was in 17 let's see. See if it give us some. Yep. So you go to this devil here. Okay, just real quick, because she spoke about the Enlightenment age, and this is when these devils, really tapped into the left hand side and start making, sprinkling, left hand philosophy, into public sectors. Okay, government, educational, let's say medicine. Okay, science, engineering, architecture. Okay, that's why you see, everything built up based on Freemason, all right, which is Satanism, architecture. Okay, now it says Adam, all right, Weishaupt was a German philosopher, okay, Thiemann, professor of civil law and later canon law, all right, and founder of the Bavarian Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt was born, okay, in electorate of Bavaria. It said Weishaupt's father, John Greg Weishaupt. Trying to skip down, read this nigga whole bio. Here you go. All right. It says at a time, however, when there was no end of making game and abusing secret societies, I plan to make use of this human, all right, fallible for a real and worthy goal for the benefit of people. I wish to do what the heads of the ecclesiastical and secular authorities ought to have done by virtue, okay, of their offices. On May 1st, 1776, John Adam Weishaupt founded the Illuminati in Electorate of Bavaria. Initially, illumination was designated for a group of outstanding and enlightened, enlightened individuals in society. Okay, and what they would do, they would plant particular individuals in different sectors. Okay, they would, put them down with the knowledge on the left hand side, and the rituals, and and they will plant these different individuals, all right, amongst, okay, the heads of different society. You had a few in government, a few, like I say, in certain industries, a few, in medicine, a few in historians, okay, architecture. Okay, and then it began to spread. So now this is what dominates. Okay, the top 20%. Okay, when you have, because even these colleges, it's meant to keep the top 20%. Okay, it's meant to keep this, enlightened doctrine at the head in these top positions. Because ultimately they got to set up where you have 20% of the people, control the rest of the 80. Okay. And you have that, that small 1% that control that 20%. Okay. And it says he also adopted the name, all right, of Brother Spartacus within the order. It says, jump down. It says the actual character of the society was an elaborate network of spies and counter spies. Each isolated cell, all right, of initiates reported to a superior whom they did not know, a party structure that was effectively adopted by some later groups. It said Weishaupt was initiated into the Masonic Lodge, okay, in 1777. His project of illumination, enlightening the understanding by the sun of reason, which will dispel the cloud of superstitions and of prejudice, was an unwelcome reform, so they wasn't dealing with it at first, okay, but eventually, they just kept, putting plants, in different sectors, and now you have the world dominated by this enlightenment way of thinking, okay. So going back here to the video, she spoke about, the age of enlightenment. All right, and these men took on a lot of Greco-Roman, okay, philosophy, all right, doctrine, ideas, and implementing them in real-time society now, okay.
Aristotle is called the father of logic. Socrates and Plato, fathers of philosophy. But most important for this story, Herodotus, the father of history, who's considered to have written the first major work of historical prose in Western literature.
So that the great and marvelous deeds of Greeks and barbarians should not go unsung.
And it's the history he recorded that would echo through Western thought for centuries. The history of the heroic Greeks.
The world will know that free men stood against a tyrant.
Against their enemy.
Embrace me as your king and as your god.
The Persians.
Yes!
No Greek would even hear the word Persian without terror.
Hundreds of peoples and tribes were forced to accept Persian rule and submit to a despotic regime.
The Persian Empire and Greek city-states fought many battles during a time known as the Greco-Persian Wars, like Marathon, Salamis, and Thermopylae, which you might know from the movie 300.
This is where we hold them!
Now, real quick, all right, what the Spartans, a lot of them with Jakes, all right, King Leonidas, all right, and they didn't deal with, a lot of the other Greek city-states, because you had Athens, Corinth, but Spartan really didn't deal, with them like that. They stayed to themselves, but either way, there was a lot of Edomites in these Greek city-states as well, and eventually, you will have a unification, of these Greek city-states, under the League of Corinth, which that league was started by Philip II of Macedonia, the father of Alexander. So you had those Greek and Persian wars, okay, and starting at 490, that's when Darius, began to try to invade, okay, these certain Greek city states. You had certain Greek city states that were sold out to the Persians, and some, that never submitted to Persian rule, okay. And so you have from 490, and then you have like 160 years later, give or take. That's when you have Alexander eventually take down the Persians, all right. And this historian Herodotus, was a Greek, all right, Edomite, and he was very biased with the history of the Greeks and the Persians, and that's why you see the Persians portrayed as a villain, and the Greeks portrayed as these underdog, heroes, lovers of liberty, and the Persians were just these tyrannical, savages. Even, you see Xerxes with, no shirt on. Like, that man wasn't walking around with no shirt. All right, he was a Persian king. Okay, he was decked out. He's fully covered. All right, earrings all in his ears and nose, like like a Hamite, like they show Ham, the big plate. So even that portrayal, of a Persian king, what I'm saying, nigga, just got, no shirt, just chains, looking crazy as hell. Okay, but that plays into, okay, him spinning the narrative of these people being barbaric. Like Esau came and just put clothes on everybody. Everybody was just butt ass naked in the earth. Okay, and he came and put clothes on everybody. Okay, so let's play this some more.
And he wrote about them not as messy geopolitical struggles, but as moral epics. The Greeks were the free and brave underdogs fighting for liberty against the barbaric and cruel Persian monarchs. In his writings, Herodotus helped birth the idea of the tyrannical despotic East.
The tiny state of democratic Athens was gaining power. This was a threat that the Persians would have to destroy. The Athenians slaughtered over 6,000 Persians in one fateful day. The world's first democracy had survived its first great test.
Fast forward 2,000 years to the Renaissance, and the reading of his work coincided with another major chapter in Western European history: the discovery of new parts of the world, new peoples we know they would come to see as barbaric. And that framing never really died. In a way, he's the father of history and of the epic war between the civilized and the barbarians.
Without their success in this conflict, they would no doubt never have had the liberty, means, or conviction.
New peoples we know they would come to see as barbaric. And that framing never really...
So now they're speaking on, when, all right, Esau, this time the Europeans came to the Americans, and they used that same narrative that they was coming, okay, to bring, civilization, to come to civilize. That's the picture I wanted to stop on, because just look at the picture. Here they come, fully clothed, okay, and the tribes were just over here, their butt ass naked, okay, but they come off the boats, fully clothed and fine clothing, and the tribes were just naked. So they was coming to bring structure and order to barbarians. So they were justified in taking the land and killing it, killing the people, going back to what the doctrine of discovery, man. Okay, and they using the same thing with those people in the Middle East. That's why people don't look at Palestinians as people. They look at them as what? Savages. Okay, they look at everybody as savages, and the hell with the Palestinians. But this is just the tactic of the devil, how he gets down. Okay, so just this picture alone, okay, which is false, okay, he just presents himself as these saviors that come to bring order, okay, to savages, man. So everything he did was justified because he brought order, because these people wasn't doing nothing with the land. They didn't have nothing going on. They didn't have a language. They didn't have this. And then they came, and now you got skyscrapers and subway stations. Okay, this is how the devil spins the narrative, man. You know,
Parts of the world, new peoples, peoples we know they would come to see as barbaric. And that framing never really died. In a way, he's the father of history and of the epic war between the civilized and the barbarians.
Without their success in this conflict, they would no doubt never have had the liberty, means, or conviction to invent, discover, or create all they did. Indeed, most of the cornerstones of modern civilization.
The problem is that this whole story gets a lot wrong.
Herodotus' account of the past seems burdened with much invented history.
Almost everything that we know about the Persian Empire actually comes from Greek sources. So it was written by their enemies.
Here's the reality.
The greatest empire the world had ever seen.
The Persian Empire began with the Achaemenid Empire and was founded by Kurosh, or Cyrus the Great. It was the largest the world had seen, stretching from Libya to India, and home to nearly half the world's population. But unlike other empires, it thrived on tolerance.
And it shows the different peoples of the empire bringing their different tributes. And the Persian Empire, unlike others, didn't try to crush people into one way of being or doing. It allowed a great diversity of habits and patterns, language and faith to live together. It became the great model of how to run an empire of dizzying diversity.
The Cyrus Cylinder guaranteed people the right to worship freely, speak their own languages, and return to their homelands. And it's often called the First Bill of Rights, written in 539 BC. Cyrus even funded the rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, earning him praise in the Hebrew Bible. Later, King Darius
the Great
would expand this legacy, building roads, standardizing currency, and creating an administrative system so advanced it became a model for future empires.
Although Cyrus's empire was eventually broken up, the idea of Cyrus himself remained. Cyrus as the model ruler. The principal source of that view of Cyrus came from the Greek historian Xenophon. His book Cyropedia was really about how to run an empire with Cyrus as the model.
Historians and philosophers considered this work a masterpiece. It was also read by Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar.
It was very popular all through the Renaissance, and particularly with the founding fathers of America. And we know that Jefferson had 2, possibly 3 copies of Xenophon's Life of Cyrus and referred to it regularly.
Run along. So you had, Xenophon, which was another historian, but he was, more accurate, and less biased than Herodotus, and he pretty much wrote a biography of, King Cyrus. And these devils, they even use a lot of, the framework that Cyrus set up, for the Persian Empire to, they use that a lot within their constitution. That's why you have freedom of religion, okay, free speech, like all these things, come from the Persian Empire. And these devils, they'll use these things, but still demonize, certain groups and call them barbarians, okay? But these devils, they hold freedom of speech like that. Persia did that before Rome, because the Greeks, okay? Matter of fact, let's go get some precepts, because as the Greeks, okay, what was going on? All right, how did the Greeks rule? Okay, so you go here to, and this was after the Greeks had taken down, okay, the Persians. This is a few generations after. All right, so this was, straight Edomites. Okay, at this point, that was in these positions of power. Now you get First Maccabees 1:44 and 144. It says, for the king, and this is speaking of Antiochus, all right, Epiphanes at this point, okay, it says from the Seleucid line, it says, for the king has sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and cities of Judah that they should follow the strange laws of the land. Okay, so they forced Hellenization on Jacob. Okay, it says, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and the holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness or profanation, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whosoever should not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. Okay, so under the Greeks, you had a forced Hellenization. They forced Jake to leave, the order and the structure of the law, and to become Hellenized. And that's why you had the Maccabean revolt, because you had certain Jakes that refused, man, and they went to war. And the Lord was with them, and eventually they had, created, a kingdom, the Hasmonean dynasty, in which they was able to, keep their laws under the Greeks. They had to go to war. And that's why by the time you get to the Romans took more of a Persian approach. And they allowed Jake, to keep the temple and, do their sacrifice as long as they paid tribute to Rome. But the Greeks, they forced Hellenization on Jake. And that's why by the time you get to the book of let's get this in Galatians. And see, you don't understand the history, the New Testament is not going to make sense to you. They're going to be lost, and you can take a precept and make a whole doctrine out of it that's off because you don't understand the history. So by the time you get to the book of Galatians, the 3rd chapter, in verse 28, it says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek." There is neither Jew nor Greek. Now, why is it saying Greek? Why is this the only nation? That is mentioning because of the Hellenization period, what we read in Maccabees. They had been going on several generations. By the time you get to the time of the apostles, the New Testament, in the time of Rome, it said there is neither bond nor free, because she's going to go into how, the Greeks, they had a slave-driven, society, it said there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Yahushua HaMashiach, and they were speaking of all Israelites. You had Jake that was, of circumcision, that knew that they was Israelites, that were descendants of, that time of the Maccabees, and you had those that had been Hellenized during that time, scattered, but they were Israelites, and they was considered themselves to be Greeks, and then it says neither bond nor free, because you had, going back to, amongst the Greeks, they will have, slaves, and then the Greeks push, slavery, what you always will have, servants, in society, you always going to have it, but then you have certain culture that was slave driven, and the Greeks was one of them, there's neither male nor female, for you're all one in Yahushua HaMashiach, and this is stated because of certain history that we went through as a people, especially under the Greeks. So let's go back to the video real quick, and she's going to bring it up to date.
And tell your Xerxes he faces free men here, not slaves.
Actually, slavery was frowned upon under the Persians. The Greek city-states, on the other hand, were built on slavery. In fact, these Spartan fighters would have each owned their own slaves, who outnumbered Spartans by 7 to 1. Fearing rebellion, the Spartans would declare war on their slaves annually, allowing them to be killed with no legal repercussions. And they would target slaves deemed strong or likely to organize resistance. As for freedom, the only people who enjoyed democracy in ancient Greece were slave-owning men. And Persian history went on long after the Achaemenid Empire.
The frontal view depictions of
the only people that enjoyed freedom in Greece were slave-owning men. Now, doesn't that sound familiar to early America? Okay? There's no new thing under the sun. All right?
Parthian art can be found in Christian artworks of the Byzantium and the Middle Ages 1,000 years after this empire's reign,
and continued to contribute to humanity. Ibn Sina's canon of medicine shaped European medical education for over 6 centuries. Al-Farabi expanded Aristotelian logic, laying groundwork for later Christian and Jewish scholastic thought. Al-Khwarizmi invented algebra. Al-Biruni accurately calculated the Earth's radius centuries before Galileo. And there's many more. These thinkers weren't peripheral. They were pillars of science, philosophy, math, medicine, poetry, architecture, spirituality, and their translated works would become essential reading during Europe's Renaissance.
There is a huge cultural difference between the Greeks and the Persians. It's a struggle between...
So you had during, and all that she was speaking about, was happening during what they call the Dark Ages. You had algebra, you had certain, architecture, there was a lot of things that happened, during what they call the Dark Ages when Jake, was in rulership. And you had, them Caliphate Ishmael, because you had the golden age of Islam, during the time what they call the Dark Ages. And there was a lot of things coming out as well, which, Jake, was sprinkled everywhere. Jake was in every society. Jake was, dealing with those Christian monarchs of, Jake was in those Christian monarchs of Europe. Jake was in these different caliphates amongst, Ishmael. Okay. That's why you have the Moors, which was those Islamic kingdom. They were Jake. So Jake was sprinkled everywhere. But it was just to show you that before the Renaissance, all right, the Renaissance, they took a lot, all right, from, what was happening during the Dark Ages, all right, and they just remixed it with, Greco-Roman, philosophy and thought, okay. And then the Persians, the Greeks destroyed a lot of the records of the Persians. That's why, you only have, mainly Greek sources when it comes to the history of the Persians. Okay, you just have a lot of Edomite sources because they destroyed a lot of the records, okay, of the Persian Empire when the Greeks took them down. Okay, let's play some more.
Freedom and slavery.
History likes to paint in black and white, West versus East, good versus evil. But the truth is far more complex. Civilizations have always exchanged ideas, borrowed from each other, and built together. Persia was a major part of that story.
Multilingual teams labored on the huge task of translating documents by Arabs, Persians, and Greeks as literally as possible from Arabic into Latin. An intellectual golden age followed, leading to the founding of several universities during the Middle Ages.
This isn't just about history. It's about how history is weaponized. Because that old story, the West as the guardian of liberty and the East like Persia as the eternal threat, is alive and well today. And representing the West is its most recent 70-year-old invention, the settler colony called Israel.
It's a map of a curse, Iran's malignant arc.
By standing up for your freedom from an evil and oppressive regime.
God bless Israel and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Athenian Greece was once cast as the only democracy in a sea of Persian tyranny. Now it's Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, against big, scary Iran.
So it's a tiny country, tiny, surrounded, so we say living in a very tough neighborhood. Nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons.
Iran lies.
Iran is still framed as the looming irrational threat, even when it's Israel that launched the war.
The people of Israel don't want this war. There is one force putting your family in grave danger. The tyrants of Tehran.
Western civilization defines itself by reason, liberty, freedom. But these traditions were refined, if not born, in the East. And the irony is ridiculous, because from the birth of this myth all the way until today, the West has repeatedly undermined liberty and freedom. especially here. So when the West tells you who they are and who their enemies are, ask who wrote the story and who got written out.
So as you can see how that narrative, even made it to the day, going back to Herodotus, this Greek historian, okay, which he started this narrative of the Greeks being these heroes against the tyranny of the barbarians, especially the Persians. All right, and we see today, Esau is running with that same narrative, that he's some type of freedom fighter against the tyrants, of the East, okay, the tyrants of Eastern culture. You see, so this same narrative, is still alive and well today, okay, and they're gonna spin that narrative and they're gonna run with it. We'll see what's happening, that narrative is running thin, okay. Yeah, I can believe it, man. Jake was everywhere, But let's go here. We just want to go to. We go here to the book of Isaiah 32. And I say Jake was sprinkled everywhere amongst the Greeks, amongst the Romans. Jake was always, and Jake always gonna come up. Jake gonna always, do their own thing wherever they at. They gonna have some type of form of greatness. Wherever Jake at. But you go here to Isaiah 32. Okay, I want to read in the NLT. Okay, and see that lie, that he's been running with is not working as effective as it once was. Okay, and he's still trying to play, that victim hero narrative, and it's wearing off. Isaiah 32:5, it says, "In that day, ungodly fools will not be heroes, scoundrels will not be respected," man. Okay, because the Lord has the devil bear out here. He can't hide behind the lies, and he can't spin narratives like he once did. Okay, the Lord has this devil out here, all right, naked. Okay, this man is bare. You see, and he's been exposed for what he really is. All right, and this whole narrative of him, being, this hero that just civilized the earth and, has brought humanity so far. If it wasn't for him, that narrative that he's been running with, then now that narrative is being, confounded. Okay, and thus said the Lord. That's why you go here, 1 Corinthians 1. Okay, and remember, this is during the time. Okay, current was a heavy, was a major Greek city state. This current had a lot of history, with Greece. Okay, so Apostle Paul understands, all the philosophy, which even those philosophers, Aristotle, Socrates, those were jakes. Okay, well, they was off, because they was into, Greek mythology. They had a few quotes that, made sense, but ultimately they was off. Okay, so this is let's go down. All right, but they had the Enlightenment. Then you had Jake. They was all into these different philosophies and things back then. Apostle Paul dealt with that in current, in Rome. You read about that in the books of Acts. Okay, and why Jake even had a dedication to the unknown God. Okay, Jake was caught all into that, the Greek philosophy and enlightenment. All right, just like Jake is today. Okay, but when you go here, 1 Corinthians, all right, 1:21, it says, "Since the Most High in His wisdom saw to it that the world would never know Him through human wisdom." Okay, because Greek philosophy, Roman philosophy doesn't teach you the true wisdom of the Most High. Okay, and that's what Esau has established. Okay, and it always puts him as God. It puts, the so-called white man, Esau, Edom, as God. Okay, so through the wisdom of this world, okay, the wisdom of this society, people have no true wisdom of Yahweh Bashim Al-Shai. Okay, and this is why he raised up the prophets with the understanding, man, to bring the knowledge of Yahweh Bashim Al-Shai back in the earth, man. Okay, it says he has used our foolish preaching to save those who believe. You know, there's only a remnant that's going to believe on the preaching, you know, through the confusion, through the lies, okay, through you know, I say through the enchantments of this devil. Okay, there's only a few, all right, there's a lot to receive. Okay, the you know, the belief of this word that's going out. Okay, and this is what this word is doing, is breaking down the strongholds, all right, that this devil has established, you know, through lies, man, through deception. Okay, so you go here to 2 Corinthians 10, you know. So the devil, you know, he can't frame himself, you know, as the victim anymore. You know, it's been, you know, these things are being cast down. You know, the deception that he used to run the earth is being cast down. 2 Corinthians 10:4 says, we use the Most High's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning, all this enlightenment that Esau has brought to the earth. Okay, the philosophies that he has put on the earth. Feminism was nothing but a philosophy of reasoning. Didn't make, that's why the results of it don't make sense. When you apply Esau's reasoning to your life, it don't make sense. Okay, capitalism, you know, when you work and give all your time, okay, most of your life to a company, make them rich, and you have just enough to get by. All right, but he presents that as liberty. Okay, the woman out the household. Okay, here it is. She's, you know, been liberated from the duties of the household. Okay, but now she's subjugated to the workforce. Okay, so now we're seeing the foolishness of Esau's, all right, philosophy, man. You know, which he presented as being enlightened. Okay, it says we use the Most High's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning, to destroy false arguments, man. Okay, so this deceptive kingdom is being broken down by truth. Okay, and it's going to keep increasing. The knowledge of Yahweh Bashim Al-Shai in the earth is going to constantly increase, man. You know, until that's the dominant, okay, standard in the earth. It's going to be the dominant way in the earth is righteousness, man. Okay, that's why Yahweh Shai is coming to wage a war and righteousness, because this devil has built an empire of lies and wickedness, man. Okay, but when you go here to Habakkuk 2:14, and we can end it here, Habakkuk 2:14, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord Yahweh Bashim Al-Shai, as the waters cover the sea. So the Lord has begun, you know, the flood of truth in the earth, you know, and it's overwhelming, you know, the deception. Okay, and there's the things that this devil, you know, once was able to get away with, all right, he can't do anymore. Okay, so that was the point, you know, just wanted to get into that, you know, Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters edified once again. I'm gonna give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Kakodash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders, GMS, who rule well, teach well, being great example towards younger brothers, and peace and blessing salutations to the whole flex. Shalom.